Against all odds, Donald Trump will once again lead what is arguably the most powerful nation in the world. How did he do it? And what does it mean for Kenya, which has in the last 2 years of President William Ruto's administration enjoyed a coveted relationship with America? I'll be back. A refrain made popular by the Terminator movie franchise that starred Arnold Schwarzenegger. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump made similar remarks when he left the White House in disgrace after failing to defend his presidency in a 2020 poll. His critics likely thought it unlikely, given the 1.1 million lives that were lost to the COVID-19 pandemic on his watch and the January 6th insurrection incited by Trump that saw his supporters storm the U.S. Capitol in an attempt to overturn the presidential election results. Following the insurrection, he became the first U.S. president to be impeached twice. He was later convicted of fraud for hush money payments made to porn star Stormy Daniels, a first for a former president, and later earned the title of sexual predator after being found to have sexually abused and defamed New York columnist E. Jean Carroll in a civil suit.
It is now clear that we've achieved the most incredible political thing. Look what happened. Is this crazy?
But on Tuesday, in another first, he became the first former president since 1892 to win an election after losing a re-election bid, surviving 2 assassination attempts in the run-up to the election to become the oldest at 78 to be elected president. Trump, viewed by his critics as a threat to democracy, proving pollsters and media who underestimated his appeal to the voter wrong, just as he did in 2016. His politically incorrect rhetoric notwithstanding, Trump made a clean sweep of the 7 battleground states, painting America red. A photo finish it was not. All right, let's bring it closer home. And before I engage my panelists, let's take a quick look at what is at stake for Kenya. President William Ruto posting on his socials that he discussed the Haiti mission with President-elect Donald Trump. And the other thing on the table is debt relief. When he was in the U.S. in May, they launched the Nairobi-Washington vision, which was assistance by the U.S. for debt relief. And there is the STIP, the Strategic Investments, Trade and Investments Partnership, which was meant to be concluded by end of this year. And other than that, let me see, what am I forgetting? Climate change is another very big issue. I am joined on set by Professor Ambassador Maria Nzomo, Professor Emeritus, but Professor of International Relations, Diplomacy and Governance. And we also have on set Dr. Tom Wolfe, who is a research consultant and tells me a registered Democrat. All right, good to have the both of you on set. The report we just aired, when he left the White House in 2020, it appeared that he was done with Professor Nzomo. How is it he is now the comeback kid?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Olive, first for having me on the show. And I think this is a very, very important topic that we are discussing because it also affects not just Kenya, but the rest of Africa, and I would say also the world. Because, as you know, we cannot ignore the United States, whatever else we want to do, because it is a great power and it has influence around the world. Yeah, I think what you have asked is quite relevant because a lot of people did not expect that he could win the elections. There was a lot of unhappy people with the first term, which is why he lost the elections in the first place. And a comeback was not in the cards in the minds of many people. But that's really us who are here outside America. I don't think many of us thought about what do the Americans think, the Americans themselves. Mm-hmm. and the various demographics. What am I saying? What are the issues that America right now is concerned about? Forget about what we think. In my assessment, the majority of Americans, they have two major concerns right now, and Trump seems to address them much better, regrettably, than Kamala did. Mm-hmm. One of them is the state of the economy. They are very, very concerned about the trends, especially post-COVID. Mm-hmm. A lot of people have no jobs, or if they have, they don't provide adequate income. And they want to hear a leader who is telling them how to resolve that problem, to help them put food on the table. So it doesn't matter whether, yes, some have said, including yourself, that this is a person with a criminal record. That becomes secondary, because it's about first their own survival. Mm-hmm.
What I think Bill Clinton called, or rather his campaign team called, it is the economy stupid.
Right. Yes.
Correct.
And then, of course, that resonates very well with his suggestion that the first thing they need to do is chase away all these immigrants, because they are the ones taking their jobs. Mm-hmm. So the immigration question becomes the number 2 issue. Now, if you take those two together, and then look on the Kamala side. Mm-hmm. We had assumed, because Kamala Harris, and I want to say that she did extremely well, everything considered. Mm-hmm. But she had a problem which had nothing to do with her, really. Mm-hmm. The first one is her gender. Now, we can ignore that and say the world has changed, and that she was already a vice president, so automatically, if Biden couldn't do it, she can do it. And we didn't think clearly about, how she came to hold that position, and the history of the United States, mm-hmm. which dates back to 1776. She was the very first woman vice president, courtesy of Biden. Mm-hmm. That tells you something. That patriarchy is alive and well in the U.S. It hasn't gone anywhere, as it is around the world. Check what is going on in the rest of the world. U.S. is not an exception in that regard. Mm-hmm. Right now, in the world, only 30% of world leaders are women in 2024. In other words, we would have been expecting a lot to expect her. Automatically, because she's a woman, she would be voted in by women and minority and all those people. Mm-hmm. And then her campaign message was the other factor. Mm-hmm. She dwelt on the very issues conservative America, male and female, don't want to hear, especially at this time. Issues of reproductive rights, the right to, issues, sexuality, LGBT question, abortion issues, and taking this other, side of, the right to do what you want with your body. That did not go too well with the very conservative America. What many of us may not know, 33% of those who voted in America were from rural areas where they are ultra-conservative. They believe in the traditional values. Mm. So I can imagine, although I don't have the actual statistics, the majority, both men and women, would vote for Trump, because he has the right message, the survival issues. Right. So there are many factors that came to play, and that's why I'm saying it's not about Kamala. Kamala did her very best. Uh-huh. And then she had a very, very short time. The time she had between when Biden, it became obvious he was not going to be able to run. And, even mentally to reorganize herself, 3 months was a very, very short time. And so the die was cast. The only person nearby was who?
Trump.
All
right. But you mentioned statistics, right?
Yeah.
And Dr. Wolf, we were led to believe, in the Olympics, the 100 meters dash, and then we're all having this debate of, is it the torso that crosses the finish line first or the foot, And we all anticipated a photo finish according to the pollsters. How were they so off the mark?
Well, I was watching one polling expert on, actually on CNN this afternoon, a Republican pollster, and in answer to a question from the host of that show, said by the time all the totals are in, Trump's margin might be only about 2% above what the polls were showing. So they weren't so far off. But I think to the extent that they were, and they certainly were in particular states, I mean, you made reference to the swing states, which everyone, or not everyone, but most people thought would take perhaps even a week for the votes to be known precisely, and yet they were known much faster. Trump's margins were bigger. I think, although it's a complicated issue, and I await the post-mortem by the pollsters themselves and other academics, which will probably take some weeks or months to analyze. I think there were two main problems. First is sampling bias. It has been known, going back to the 2016 race, that more of Trump supporters refused to be interviewed because Trump would also often badmouth pollsters, mainstream media. And the fact that we don't do in the U.S. face-to-face household polls, too expensive, that we do sometimes here, but they're all done either by phone or on the internet. As I've been reading, it has been a big challenge, and pollsters acknowledge this before the election, to get a sample which is actually going to reflect the distribution of voting intentions among those who are participating in the surveys. And one thing related to that, there was one poll, I'll give you one example, that came out by a highly regarded pollster, a woman in the state of Iowa, and she had Harris at 47%, just a week or so before the election, Trump at 44%, and 9% not mentioning who they were going to vote for. Now, I suspect, but I can't prove it, I suspect that most of those 9% were Trump voters who were shy about confessing they were going to vote for him. Partly for one of the reasons that Professor Nzoma mentioned, the guy's a convicted criminal. And with other cases that would have proceeded, I'm sure, to conviction, were he not elected and now is able to use the Justice Department to dismiss those cases against him, which the president has a right to do, although it's never happened before, that we had somebody elected with criminal indictments. So I think there was a certain amount of shyness. And if I can make a brief comparison to the last Kenyan election, we at TIFA, where I do most of my consulting, also had Raila ahead by 5 or 6%. And I know that one or two other polling firms also mistakenly showed that he would win and defeat William Ruto quite easily. But that didn't happen. I don't think in that case it's because our samples were wrong, but when it came to voter turnout, if you actually took the IEBC results and ran them equally, if the turnout had been equal in all 47 counties, Raila Odinga would have won that election. Not by much, less than 1%, but he would have won. So that question would be, why did so many of Raila's supporters who told us in surveys they were going to vote for him didn't bother to go and vote? I'll leave that to Kenyans to decide. But the other factor, which is also, I think, similar, we found, especially on Mount Kenya, far more people telling us and the other companies that they were going to be voting for Raila than actually did. And my assumption, I'm doing some informal discussions with my friends from the mountain, is that because the government administration on the ground was being used to get out support for Raila, people feared, even in a confidential survey, that if they actually told us they were going to be voting for Ruto, they would be punished because the government machinery, the system, as Raila's brother called it, was supporting Raila. So they were shy to tell us their real intention. Now, in the U.S., for people who don't give their true voting intentions to pollsters, I don't think it's because they think the government's going to punish them, but there are these other factors about, for example, in 2016, after the election, it was proved in research that women who were being interviewed by a live person on a phone were less willing to say they were going to vote for Trump than women who were being interviewed automatically, robotically by a computer, even when you controlled for demographics, for education, for religion, for economic status, and so on. So there was that shyness there also. So, I mean, I'm sure with time, more of this will come out. But the bottom line is, as you suggested in your question, it's quite an embarrassing performance for the pollsters again.
Okay. Yeah, because it happened 2016, 2020.
That's right.
But Professor Maria Nzomo, Professor Ambassador, how much change should we anticipate in Kenya's foreign policy? There's a Haiti mission. President William Ruto was there in May on a state visit. Commitments to do with climate change. There's the trade deal we're anticipating, although Mukisa Kitui said, that's just not going to happen. But several things in the pipeline. How much change should we anticipate in our foreign policy?
Ours or the U.S. one?
Ours.
I don't think we have much that we need to change, really. And I'm saying this because if there is anything going to happen, it is not really affecting Kenya that much in terms of the changes that are going to come from the U.S. direction. Now, if you look at what Trump is trying to do, remember Trump is a businessman, first and foremost, and even politically, he runs politics like a business.
Amen.
And he did that even in his first term of office. So, if we know already, and there is nothing new that we already know the pattern, the whole of those 4 years, all he is trying to do right now is to finish what he started. He is not going to change fundamentally. Now, the only thing that has changed for us is that we have been dealing with another president for the last 4 years, and there are some of these new deals that we had entered. It was not part of the package. But let's start with what Trump is likely to do himself, which may or may not affect us in terms of altering anything in our foreign policy. He is going to try to implement what he's been telling people in the campaign, and he had told us that before, during his first term, that, for him, he's committed to America first. America first. And making America great again, meaning become the global, power, although we are no longer in a unipolar framework. And that's the song he was singing throughout the campaign. Now, how is he going to enact that? He is going to selectively decide which countries to deal with on the issues that he thinks can feed, like a businessman, into this thing he thinks can only work by saying, Olive, what are you giving me in exchange for this? It's a transaction.
Okay.
So he's going to place transactional politics on two items especially. The economy issue is, again, top on his agenda. So in the case of Africa, including Kenya, you'll be looking at what is it they're offering us and what kind of trade and investment should we get involved in. Most likely, he'll pick the same projects in the first instance that he himself put in place in his first term. One of them is the one you just mentioned. The one which was around this question of the strategic trade and investment partnership, which he left unfinished, and which even Biden has not managed to finish.
Yes.
Now that one he's likely to pick up again, and you can see that doesn't affect us in any way in terms of we don't have to change anything. It probably he'll renegotiate certain things, but that is going to stay. Then there is another project he had also started, called Prosper Africa Initiative. Yes. This was supposed to encourage U.S. multinational corporations to invest here, get markets, and all those. And that, for him, also feeds into his America first. That's part of feeding to his national interest. Now, again, that is not new. Yeah, this is part of the reason I'm saying there is not much Kenya needs to change. And the only program which was put in place by Biden, which he may or may not want to go on with, is this thing called Lobito Corridor. And it was more or less like an investment, but it was pretty much close to what the Chinese are doing, because this is a railway that was being built connecting Angola, DRC, and Zambia. For the simple reason, you know what DRC has? Minerals and other things. Zambia has copper, and Angola has also, strategic resources. So that infrastructure was put in place, but the process was not complete. It was like still in the works. So that was not his project. So that might go. Does it affect Kenya? No. Now, when it comes, the only issue now Kenya should be concerned about is this Haiti, because Kenya was counting on the support of the U.S., financially speaking, because although it's supposed to be a UN project, but as you know, it was more or less part of the deal of a major non-NATO ally, etc., yes, all of that. And they had already had some kind of agreement. I don't know the details. Now, Trump may or may not want to pick it up, because, as you know, he's even with NATO, the real NATO, of which he's a key player. Even during his first term, he had indicated that the U.S. is not going to go bankrolling the NATO anymore. The other countries, members, if they don't pay their bit, U.S. is out. Meaning he is no longer concerned with alliances and multilateralism. It is America first. He's really retreating into nationalism and what is good for America. Now, that is a space Kenya may be left in the middle, and I don't know whether we have the capacity to then persuade the UN to take on the responsibility or we simply withdraw, because my thinking is that Trump might just look at Haiti and say, okay, they are here neighbors. We will do exactly what we are doing for other countries in terms of migrants, because that is their main worry. Find a way of stopping Haiti's going to the U.S. And then look for ways of dealing with those who are in the U.S., especially those who are not legally there. And then the problem of what happened to Haiti, can you simply say, let them sort out their problem. It is their problem. I'm not saying that's what he's going to do, but my thinking he could do that. Now, that, of course, will affect Kenya in terms of how long can we be there, because we went there, with goodwill, but we don't have the financial capacity to fund, a mission like that. We are actually volunteering a lot of our troops there.
All right.
So that may require now some adjustment for us. So, in terms of the immediate concern, especially in the area of security, the economy, and related issues, I don't think there is much we need to do in terms of even rethinking our foreign policy, except we need to know that we are, now this is a world where the only, strategy that can work for us is to look also inside. We have to now retreat back to our continent, okay, and find solutions there for our various problems.
All right, just one final question for you.
I was going to comment something about that,
okay,
but...
Yeah, okay, you can just combine the two. Yeah. Didn't these teams, because something Maria said was the messaging, for example, for Kamala Harris did not resonate with the American public. Don't they do their own research? Because, now I'm even seeing the data that's coming out tells us how many Hispanics, women, men voted for Trump versus Kamala, black men, white women. It's so detailed. Don't these campaign teams do the same level of research?
You would think so. Let me address that in a minute, but just if I can follow on from what Professor Nzomo said, in terms of the implications for Kenya. And here I would say not foreign policy, but domestic policy. We haven't done a survey, so I don't have data, but just looking at social media, I've been seeing for some time, and you have too, a lot of criticism of the American ambassador here for not being stronger in the response to the violations that took place during and after the Gen Z protests, that she wasn't strong enough on human rights. And that's kind of ironic, because we know that's the last thing that Donald Trump would care about. So I've heard even some of my friends sending me text messages saying, oh, they're happy to see Ambassador Whitman go, because she's been too close to President Ruto and not willing enough to criticize, especially on these killings, disappearances, and so on. But I tell them, based on his record, as Dr. Nzomo said, Trump is transactional. I mean, his people are, unless I'm very wrong, in who he's going to have in the State Department, they're going to care far less about human rights issues and be more concerned with business investment, what's good for America. And one other thing related to that, something that also Ambassador referred to, is that the strong evangelical Christian support behind the Trump campaign. We saw in Uganda, once President Museveni signed this bill criminalizing, even with death penalty, for promoting or engaging in homosexuality and so on, that hasn't happened here, despite the efforts, I don't think for quite such a draconian, I haven't seen the details of Honorable Kaluma's bill, but remember that was introduced in Parliament and it didn't get anywhere. Now, after President Museveni signed that bill in Uganda, Uganda lost a significant amount of American and Western aid. I don't have the figures. But I think given the fact that this strong constituency behind Trump has a much more restrictive attitude to women's reproductive issues, abortion, however you want to term it, as well as the homosexuality, LGBTQ issue, I think that it wouldn't surprise me if those Kenyan voices who are closer to what the political class did in Uganda might feel emboldened. So we'll just have to wait and see. Remember that hostile reaction they had when the Supreme Court allowed that NGO that was advocating for homosexual rights, not behavior.
From AGOA.
That's right. That they had been removed or banned, whatever, and then they were reinstated by the Supreme Court. So I think that those are a couple of domestic issues which we might keep an eye on. But just finally, because you've asked a very complicated question about the strategy of the Harris campaign, I think, as been pointed out by many commentators that I've seen on CNN and BBC, she's in a very difficult position. It is clear that across the globe, quite a few incumbent governments have been voted out in the last couple of years. And when you have 70% of Americans saying the country's going in the wrong direction, about the same percent as Infotrack got in its last poll here, I think it was 73%, it made it very difficult for her to defend her own government, the Biden administration's record. And there's also a lot of loyalty to Biden as an individual for his decades-long service in the Senate and then as Obama's vice president. So on the one hand, she couldn't really attack the government of which she's been in a part. But unless she did, she wouldn't be able to counter Trump's argument by saying, make America great again, here's what I'm going to do. And where she's been faulted by people like Senator Bernie Sanders, she didn't present the American voters with an alternative agenda that would build on what Biden has done, but also say, here are all the things we couldn't do, mainly because we didn't have enough votes in the Congress to get past the Republican obstruction, starting with their immigration bill that they'd worked out, which satisfied, by and large, the Border Patrol people and so on. But Trump sent a message to Congress saying, vote it down so I can use that as a campaign issue. So she was really in a very, very tough spot. So whereas I'm sure she had what you suggested, a lot of analysts, people a lot smarter, know much more about America than I do because I've lived abroad, so on, but they were really in a very, very narrow space.
Okay. So we have run out of time. Is it really quick?
Sorry?
Did you have something to add to what I said to either counter it?
It was just that part about Kamala. And, she did not, really say what difference should make.
That's right.
To, what Biden had failed to do.
All right.
That, how does she distance herself from Biden and, really, produce something which is convincing to the American people that if she becomes president, she'll actually take on the job differently from Biden, especially on those very issues that they are concerned about, the economy and so on.
All right.
And remember also,
I know there's a lot
because because Biden withdrew so late, there wasn't time to do a competitive Democratic primary.
All right. So unfortunately, I'll have to press pause on the conversation. But I will endeavor to bring you back, because something else I wanted to look at was Kagame's tweet in welcoming a Trump presidency. And yet they had, remember, the second-hand clothes spat with Rwanda. But I'll leave that for another day. Thank you very much, Professor Ambassador Maria Nzomo, Professor of International Relations, Diplomacy and Governance, and Dr. Tom Wolf, research consultant. We take a break, but coming up,